Millionaire CEO ordered room cleaning, but a small poor girl showed up, working as a maid. This story isn't just about a CEO who found a sense of family in the most unexpected way. It's a reminder that family isn't something you're simply born into. It's something you choose to keep through love. When a child is brave enough to trust someone, then the adult must be brave enough not to abandon them again. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This tale will touch your heart in a way you never saw coming. Enjoy the story. The man was no longer used to unexpected knocks at his door. But that afternoon, inside room 409 of the Carrington Grand Hotel, perched along the coastline of San Diego, Elliot Carrington rose from his desk at the sound of a soft knock, so gentle it could have been mistaken for distant waves, yet impossible to ignore. Maybe it was because it was his first day back after an internal scandal that had shaken the entire company. Maybe it was because he had chosen to stay alone on the top floor, no assistant, no manager. Or maybe, deep down, he sensed that something was about to change. He opened the door, and time stopped. Standing before him wasn't a hotel staffer in a crisp uniform, nor a breakfast tray he hadn't ordered. It was a little girl, no more than 9 years old, her messy black hair tied into a lopsided bun, an oversized apron covering a faded red dress. In her hand was a damp rag. No name tag, no introduction, no trace of fear in her eyes. Only presence. Quiet, firm, and completely out of place in this glittering world. It took Elliot a few seconds to find his voice again. "Are you lost?" he asked. The girl shook her head. "Quick, certain. I'm here to clean the room." His chest tightened, not because of the words, but because of the way she said them. Matter of fact. Like someone used to never being questioned. He stepped back instinctively, as if something had pushed him. She entered, walked straight to the desk, where he had just been sitting, picked up a cloth that had fallen, and began wiping the glass with movements so practiced it sent a chill down his spine. $1,000 per night suite, being cleaned in silence by a 9-year-old child. Elliot stood frozen, and for the first time in years, he didn't understand the room he was standing in, didn't understand the world he had built, one in which this girl, with tiny hands and an unreadable face, was the only thing that felt real. Elliot Carrington was not the kind of man to lose control. He had built his hotel empire on calm, on solving crises the way other men solved crossword puzzles. But the moment he saw the little girl kneeling to scrub the bathroom threshold, as if that was what she was meant to do, he felt like crushing the phone in his hand. He dialed the front desk, his voice low and controlled. "Room 409. Tell me why there's a child cleaning my suite." There was a short pause on the other end. Then a soft, rehearsed female voice replied, "Yes. Mr. Carrington, one moment. I'll transfer you to the floor manager." The sound of the line transferring rang in his ear like cold metal. Then came a man's voice. Familiar, smooth. Jasper Lyman, top floor manager. The very one Elliot had personally interviewed 3 years ago. "Mr. Carrington," Jasper said, slightly out of breath. "I understand something unexpected has occurred. But if you'll allow me, I can—" "Spare the formalities," Elliot cut in. "I see a child, not a staff member. No protective gear, no supervision. I don't need an explanation. I need the truth." On the other end, Jasper hesitated for a long moment, then exhaled. "That's Nina Rosales. We occasionally allow her to help. A temporary arrangement. Her grandmother has been cleaning this floor for nearly 20 years. Elliot narrowed his eyes, watching the girl as she gently adjusted the bedspread like a seasoned housekeeper. He hadn't misheard. Did they allow this? A 9-year-old child holding a wet rag in my suite, scrubbing the floor like it's the most normal thing in the world. He said slowly, each word like a knife. And you call that temporary? We didn't want to cause disruption. High-tier guests rarely notice who's doing the work. And Jasper hesitated. She's quite good. The last sentence made the blood in Elliot's veins run cold. Very good? This little girl wasn't supposed to be good at cleaning rooms. Not at her age. Not here. Elliot said nothing more. He hung up before Jasper could offer any defense. Inside the room, Nina had moved on to the balcony area, her hands never stopping. No fear, no fatigue. Just the silence of someone who had long since learned not to ask for anything. He wasn't sure what angered him more. The fact that a child was cleaning his room, or the terrifying indifference with which this system was swallowing her. Under his name, under his authority. Elliot stared out toward the sea, waves continuing their steady crash along the distant shore. But something inside his mind had begun to crack. Elliot Carrington stepped into the elevator with fury flashing in his eyes. His finger pressed the button labeled B2, Staff Only. A floor he hadn't stepped foot on in nearly 10 years of running Carrington Estates. The doors closed in silence, and when they opened, he was no longer in the world of glass and imported walnut wood. He entered a dimly lit hallway where there was no carpet, no soft classical music drifting from hidden speakers. Only the sharp stench of bleach, hurried footsteps, and the clatter of laundry carts echoed across the cold tile. Employees passed him, at first not recognizing him, then freezing mid-step when they saw the familiar face from business headlines. Elliot Carrington, the man who had never set foot down here, now appeared without warning. No one dared speak. He walked straight ahead. No turning, no questions. The only room he intended to reach was the supply manager's office, Jasper's office. And there, Jasper was already standing, as if he had known this moment was coming. "Mr. Carrington," Jasper began, but Elliot raised his hand, cutting him off. "Where does that girl live?" Jasper swallowed. "In the housing block behind the hotel. One of the old units we used to assign to staff years ago." "Take me there." "Sir, it's not..." "Right now, Jasper." No one said anything else. Moments later, a small electric cart carried them around the parking lot, past the garden behind the hotel, an area untouched by the glow of the lobby lights. Beneath a warped tin awning stood a row of aging single-level units. Some windows were patched with duct tape, others covered by thin fabric in place of curtains. They stopped in front of the last door in the row, a weather-worn wooden one, crudely marked 24B. Jasper knocked. No answer. But just as Elliot turned to leave, the door creaked open, and there was Nina, not surprised, not scared. She simply looked at them as if she had known this would happen. "Mr. Carrington, you remember my name? I read it in the paper. You cleaned my room this morning, room 409. Nina nodded. No explanation. No excuses. Behind her, the room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of an old table lamp. Elliot stepped forward, not to intrude, just to see more clearly. In the corner stood a narrow wooden bed, where an elderly woman lay curled up, a blanket pulled to her chin. Her lips were dry, her hands trembled faintly, but her face held a gentle kind of weariness. the kind of kindness found in people who've spent a lifetime working so that others could rest. Elliot turned back to Nina. "You're here, taking care of her alone?" Nina didn't respond immediately. She looked at him for a moment, then softly said, "We don't have anyone else." And in that moment, Elliot Carrington, the man who had once stood before international finance boards without blinking, felt as if someone had placed an invisible weight on his chest. He said nothing, just stood there between two worlds, and for the first time, didn't know which one he truly belonged to. The room had no smell, no scent of food, no medicine, not even the faint trace of human presence. Only a blur of dim yellow light from an old bulb, and a thin layer of dust covered the table where a half-empty glass of water sat carefully beside an uncapped bottle of pills. Elliot Carrington stepped in, as if entering a forbidden place. His expensive leather shoes touched the cold tiled floor without making a sound. Behind him, the door clicked shut with a soft whisper. The room contained only 3 pieces of furniture: a single bed, a wobbly wooden chair, and an old iron table used as a makeshift kitchen. On the bed, Nina's grandmother, the woman who had once been part of his hotel system, lay motionless, as though held together only by routine. Her eyes were closed, but her breathing remained, weak, steady, defiant. Nina walked over to the bed, gently pulling the blanket up to her grandmother's shoulders and adjusting the pillow without saying a word. These were movements she had repeated hundreds of times, needing no instruction from anyone. Elliot watched her, and he didn't see a child. He saw a person, small, thin, but carrying a role he himself had once run from, a caregiver. He quietly sat down in the only other chair, the wobbly one by the makeshift kitchen. It groaned softly beneath him, as if unfamiliar with the weight of an adult. "How old are you, Nina?" he asked, voice low. 9, she answered, eyes still on her grandmother. "How long have you been working?" "A year. But before that, I helped fold towels, clean mirrors, just little things." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "We did," Nina replied, turning to look at him. Her eyes weren't angry, just tired. But no one listened. Or they listened, then walked away. Elliot's palm curled into a fist. For a moment, all the CSR reports, all the People First slogans he had read at board meetings felt utterly hollow. He looked around. No fridge, no heater, just a tiny wooden shelf with a few cans of tuna, an empty bottle of oil, and a couple of unopened packs of noodles. On the table were old medical bills and water-blurred prescriptions. Each detail a quiet knife. "How long have you been living like this?" "Since the first time Grandma fell." "No one from the hotel helped?" "They said she wasn't staff anymore, and I don't have a contract." Elliot didn't know what to say, because deep down, he knew it was true, not illegal, just inhumane. He pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. His hand trembled slightly, but the words appeared clearly, one by one. Hospital bed, hourly nurse, food supply, school enrollment, legal support, emergency cash, humanitarian residency card. Nina watched him. "What are you doing?" "Fixing something I should have seen a long time ago." She furrowed her brow, then asked, slow and clear like an adult, "So, I won't have to clean rooms anymore?" Elliot looked at her, then at the old woman, her wrinkled hand still clutching the thin blanket as if afraid it too might be taken away. "No, Nina," he said. "You won't clean rooms anymore, and you won't worry about dinner from now on." She didn't nod, didn't smile, just blinked slowly, as if measuring whether she could believe what she had just heard. For the first time in a very long time, Elliot didn't feel like a CEO, not the builder of hotels, not the man who ran them. He was just a man sitting in the dark, across from a child, trying to do what was right. The next morning, Elliot Carrington arrived at the door of room 24B at 6:45 a.m. No chauffeur, no assistant, no gray tailored suit that had been his armor for the past 2 decades. Just a navy turtleneck, jeans, and a pair of simple sneakers he had borrowed from his younger brother. Their last meeting had been 3 years ago. In his hands were 2 steaming breakfast bags, pancakes, eggs, orange juice, from the restaurant below the hotel, and a brand new backpack still wrapped in plastic. Inside it were clothes, notebooks, colored pencils, and a small pair of sneakers he had personally chosen the night before. After asking the front desk for the average shoe size of a 9-year-old girl, the door opened after a gentle knock. Nina was still wearing the oversized t-shirt from the day before, her eyes carrying traces of sleep. But she wasn't surprised. She just looked at him as if his return was inevitable, even though no one had ever done that before. "You're up early," he said, his voice soft as breath. "I usually get up to help Grandma take her medicine." "Well, today I brought breakfast." He handed her the food bag. She took it with both hands, sniffed the pancakes through the paper, then gave a slight nod. "Thank you." In the cramped kitchen, the two sat at a small table that barely fit 2 people. Nina ate slowly, focused, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward him, watchful but not distant. After breakfast, Elliot stood and handed her the new backpack. "You said yesterday you didn't have clothes for school," he said. "Now you do." She took it and unzipped it slowly. When she saw what was inside, new clothes, a pair of white sneakers with blue trim, a box of colored pencils, notebooks, and a small journal with her name, Nina Rosales, printed on the cover, she said nothing. Just silence. As if speaking might cause it all to vanish. Elliot didn't press her. He stepped into the other room, where Dolores still lay in bed. But this time, a nurse was there, gently checking her breathing, changing the sheets, making notes. He had called her the night before, a home care professional, the first person to enter that room, not out of pity, but to do her job with dignity. "Is she okay?" he asked quietly. "Weak, but stable. She needs time and proper care." Elliot nodded. "We have time." When he returned, Nina was already at the door, dressed in her new outfit, the backpack on her shoulders, her hair neatly tied into 2 small braids. She didn't smile, but her face had softened, like the outermost layer of armor had begun to crack. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I don't know the way to school." "Then I'll take you." She looked at him. No questions, no resistance. She simply stepped beside him and stood quietly, waiting for him to lead the way. And Elliot understood that silence was no longer self-defense. It was the watchfulness of a child, sensing, for the first time, that an adult wasn't about to leave. In the car, Nina sat in the back seat, clutching the strap of her backpack. Elliot glanced over his shoulder and spoke softly. "You'll be going to a small school. I spoke with the principal. They know your situation. There will be a classmate who'll help you get settled. Do I have to take a test? Number just be yourself. Is that okay?" Nina nodded, very slightly, but to him, that nod felt louder than a billion-dollar handshake. That first morning passed like a slow breath. No rush, no shrill alarms, No automated reminders from a system about tasks to complete. Just Elliot Carrington sitting at the old table in apartment 24B, pouring orange juice into 2 plastic cups, watching the early sunlight stretch across the dusty window. Across from him, Nina chewed on a piece of pancake, her hair neatly tied, her gaze drifting toward the street outside, where the school bus had just rolled by. She hadn't taken the bus that morning. Elliot had driven her all the way to the school gate, waited until she walked through the iron doors, and turned back to look at him, not waving, just nodding. But it was a nod that made his chest fall completely still, as if he had just been entrusted with something important, not through words, but through silence steeped in trust. And then the days began to repeat. Not perfectly, but steadily. Each morning, Elliot arrived at 24B to pick her up. They had breakfast together, sometimes cereal, sometimes boiled eggs and toast, then got in the car. Few words were exchanged, but he noticed she had begun asking small questions. Was your school big when you were little? Do I have to switch classes if I do really well? Can someone still be a CEO if they eat pancakes? Elliot didn't always know the right answers, but he answered anyway. And that, it seemed, was what Nina had never received from anyone before. A reply not followed by dismissal. In the afternoon, after school, she got into the car with a tired but bright expression, bringing back stories about art class, a math quiz, or a new friend named Macy who stuttered a little. Small things, but Elliot began to remember them the way he once remembered stock prices. Maybe even more so. Back at apartment 24B, the atmosphere began to shift. Gloria, Nina's grandmother, was still weak, but she opened her eyes more often. She saw Elliot, sometimes murmuring something unintelligible, but always gripped her granddaughter's hand tightly, as if drawing just enough strength from her to hold on a little longer. Elliot didn't just bring food and medicine. He changed the bed sheets, bought a new fan, bought a night lamp with a soft amber glow so Nina could read beside her grandmother at night. The room was no longer a place of endurance. It began to feel like a home, however temporary, however modest, but a home with rhythm and breath. One afternoon, when Elliot walked in after work, he saw Nina lying on her stomach on the rug, practicing penmanship in a new notebook. She didn't hear the door. She was focused, tongue slightly poking from the corner of her mouth, utterly concentrated. Beneath her writing, she'd written the title, My Family. Elliot stood there, not calling out, just watching. And for the first time in years, he felt something begin to sprout inside him. Not triumph, not pride, but something deeper, more quietly persistent. Something called belonging. On Thursday afternoon, it rained. Not a downpour. Just small droplets, falling steadily against the fogged-up window of apartment 24B. The amber light in the room cast a warm hue across the walls, so still that Elliot could hear the pencil tapping paper. Steady, interrupted, like the rhythm of a child weighing how honest she wanted to be. Nisa was lying on her stomach on the rug, notebook spread out before her, her legs swaying slowly in the air, hair falling over one cheek from a loose side tie. She didn't know Elliot had entered. Or if she did, she didn't stop. He didn't interrupt. He sat down on the chair near the window, placed a bag of cookies on the table, and waited. Not out of politeness, but because of a feeling he hadn't yet named. When she finished, she looked up. Meeting his eyes, she didn't smile. She simply turned the notebook around and pushed it toward him. It's for homework, she said. The teacher said to write about the person you live with and how they help you. Elliot opened the notebook. The writing was uneven, some strokes pressed too hard, others faint. But every line was full of meaning. My name is Nina Rosales. I live in a small place. It is warm even when it rains. My grandma is sick, but I help her, and she still loves me. I used to clean hotel rooms because we didn't have food. Then one day, a man opened a door. He didn't yell. He didn't tell me to leave. He asked if I was okay. He said I should be a kid. I didn't believe him. But he came back. He keeps coming back. Elliot said nothing for a long while. He read those lines, once, then twice, then a third time, each word soaking deeper into his skin, until it pulsed in his bloodstream like a new rhythm in the life of a man who once believed he had nothing left to change. Nina didn't look at him. She had already turned back to write again, as if what she had just shared was no big deal. But to Elliot, it meant everything. That night, after Nina had fallen asleep on the sofa, a children's book half closed on her chest, Elliot stepped out onto the small balcony, her notebook still in his hand. The rain had stopped, but he was still full of waves. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number he never thought he'd call late at night, his private attorney. The voice on the other end was soft, surprised. Elliot didn't waste time with pleasantries. I need to talk about guardianship. Temporary for now, but I want to begin the process. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure, Elliot? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. When he hung up, Elliot looked down at his own hand. It wasn't trembling. There was no hesitation. He understood that what he had just decided wasn't about saving a child. It was about finally belonging to something, for the first time in his life. Something that a CEO, a millionaire, a man who once prided himself on needing no one, finally had the courage to admit, I need a place to come home to. And this time, I choose to be chosen. The next morning, Elliot arrived at the law office beneath a cloudy sky. No press, no conference, no media statement. Just a man in simple clothes, knocking on the door of a modest office tucked behind the city center, where big things often begin with fragile sheets of paper. I want to initiate guardianship for a little girl named Nina Rosales, he said plainly. The lawyer looked up, brow furrowed. Biological relation? None. Are you a relative? No. Do you intend to adopt? Yes, but not yet. Do you have a reason? Elliot paused for a single beat, then said, because she chose me, when there was no one else left to choose. A few days later, Elliot submitted all the necessary paperwork. Asset declaration, a signed pledge for ongoing medical support, a statement from the nurse assigned to Gloria, even a handwritten letter, one that took him 3 nights to finish. In the letter, he wrote, I'm not doing this out of pity. I'm doing it because I've lived in a world where everything is replaceable, except the feeling of being truly needed by someone. Nina didn't ask me for anything, but she gave me the chance to do something right, for the first time without a profit and loss sheet attached. But not everyone accepted it quietly. Word leaked from within that CEO Carrington was quietly sponsoring an unknown child. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Some shareholders murmured, what is he doing? Damaging the brand. Is he trying to make up for something? Another PR campaign? Elliot heard all of it and ignored all of it. But there was one person he couldn't ignore. Jasper Lyman, the floor manager, the man who once turned away while Nina cleaned the floor of room 409. That morning, Jasper walked into his office, holding the routine operations report. But instead of placing it on the desk, he stood in silence for a moment, then said, "Sir, I know I was wrong." Elliot looked up. "Wrong about what?" "Because I saw that little girl working, and I turned away." "Afraid of losing your job?" "Because I believed no one cared." There was a pause. Elliot closed the file folder. "You were wrong," he said. "Someone did care. And now you can either be the one who starts over or keep turning away like before. You decide." Jasper took a deep breath. "Then let me be a witness in the guardianship file. I'll tell everything, from the beginning." That evening, Elliot returned to 24B. Gloria was more lucid. The nurse said she had begun reacting to sounds, especially Nina's voice. In that small room, he explained to Nina, slowly, what he was doing with the guardianship process. "I want you to live with me. Legally, I want that if anything ever happens, no one can take you away." Nina said nothing. She sat still, looking at him as if trying to fully grasp what it all meant. "So, if I live with you, do I have to call you Dad?" Elliot froze. Not because of the question, but because of how naturally she asked it. No awkwardness. No fear. "You can call me anything that makes you feel safe," he replied. Nina nodded gently, said nothing more. But as she walked past the bedroom, she left a single line, almost offhandedly, before closing the door. "I think girls should know they won't be left behind." And the door closed. But inside Elliot, another door opened, larger, quieter, where a man who had once stood at the very top was only now learning how to stand still. Inside the heart of a child. That morning, the sun was out. The first warm, pale light after days of unbroken gray, slipping through the dusty window of apartment 24B, softening the cold in the air. Elliot was slicing fruit in the kitchen when the nurse stepped out from the bedroom, clipboard in hand, her expression slightly changed. "She's awake," the nurse said softly, "and she wants to speak with you." He set down the knife and wiped his hands. Not hurried, but his heart beat faster than usual. It had been over a week since he first met her, in that silent, half-conscious state. He had cared for her quietly, like a responsibility no one asked of him. But this was the first time she'd called his name. Willingly. Elliot stepped into the room, where Gloria was lying on her side, facing the window, light casting a thin silver halo around her hair. She turned her head at the sound of his steps, eyes narrowing, not from confusion, but with a clarity that cut deep. "You're Mr. Carrington," she said in a hoarse voice. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. "Yes, ma'am. But Nina calls me Elliot," he replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. She nodded slightly, lips trembling. "She told me everything. I know what you're doing. She needs more than what she can give herself. And you think you can give her everything?" Elliot exhaled, uncertain whether to answer as a businessman or as a man still learning what it means to love without condition. "Not everything, ma'am. But I'll stay, even when it gets harder." She was quiet for a long time. Then she extended her hand beyond the blanket. Elliot took it. Her hand was cold and shaky, but her grip was firm. She looked at him like she was seeing through every mask he'd ever worn. "She needs a home," she said slowly. "I taught her how to survive, but I couldn't teach her how to trust someone." Elliot didn't know why that line caught in his throat. I'm not good with family, he admitted. I grew up in boarding schools, then college, then work. The family was just a word on a personal background form. Nothing more. But she chose you, Gloria said softly. Just don't leave her the way the world once did. That line, neither a legal clause nor a written affidavit, was for Elliot a spiritual certificate to move forward. That afternoon, Elliot took Nina to a small bookstore at the end of the street. A dusty little place with dark wooden floors, a bell that jingled when the door opened, and that comforting scent of old pages and timeless stories. You get to pick 3 books, he said, pushing the door open for her. Nina looked at him like he had just taken her to an amusement park. She wandered through the shelves like an explorer discovering uncharted land, fingers grazing the spines, pausing here and there to skim the first lines. Elliot didn't follow. He stood quietly in the corner, watching, waiting, like a father learning how to step back so a child could step forward. After nearly an hour, Nina came to him, holding 3 books, a comic book, a science book filled with pictures, and one titled, The Girl Who Mended the Sky. He read the title and smiled. Why did you pick this one? Nina shrugged. Because I think sometimes things that are broken can still be fixed. Elliot nodded. And sometimes people find themselves while trying to fix something for someone else. On the way home, as the car stopped in front of the apartment, Nina looked at him, clutching the bag of new books, and asked softly, Uncle Elliot, if one day Grandma's gone, will you still be here? Elliot turned to her. His eyes met hers. No wind, no poetic promises needed. I didn't come for your grandmother. I stayed for you. Nina paused, then nodded. Light as first rain, but here, in this small room, a child had just drawn him standing under the roof of his own home. He looked up. Nina had turned away, pretending to arrange her books as if that drawing were just another sketch like any child might do on any given day. But Elliot knew. Every stroke in that picture was a fragment of forgiveness, a piece of trust, a beginning. He didn't say anything. He simply opened his arms, and as if she had been waiting, Nina stepped in and wrapped her arms tightly around him. Her small, thin arms circling his waist, her head resting against his chest, as if searching for a heartbeat she could believe in. Elliot closed his eyes. No cameras, no headlines. Only truth. He had been chosen, not for his money, not for his power, but because a child believed, this time, an adult wouldn't walk away. Saturday morning, a soft rain, not the piercing rain of separation, but a gentle kind, like the quiet greeting of a new life. Rain that soaked hair, spotted sleeves, and made people want to shield each other instead of themselves. Elliot stood by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass, his chest quietly stirring. In his hand was an envelope from the family court, thick white paper, sealed with a red stamp. He hadn't opened it, not because he didn't know what it said, but because some truths, once real, leave you speechless for a moment. Nina was still sleeping, wrapped in her favorite green blanket. Beside her lay The Girl Who Mended the Sky. She was nearly at the end this time. On the bookmark, Elliot had written a note the night before. We don't fix the world, but we can stitch the part we love. Just an hour later, he drove to Nina's school. Today was presentation day for a class project called The Person I Trust the Most. Gloria couldn't come, but Elliot was there. He sat in the back row of the community room among other parents, some of whom glanced at him with recognition from the media. But this time, he no longer cared. Then, it was Nina's turn. She stepped up in her pale yellow dress, holding a laminated drawing. "My name is Nina Rosales," she began slowly. "The person I trust the most is someone who doesn't make big promises, but always comes back." She lifted the drawing. It was a house with 3 people, like the old one. But this time, there was a sign on the front door. In clumsy, hand-drawn letters, it read, "Welcome home, Dad." Elliot could no longer stay in his seat. He stood up. He didn't speak, didn't rush, just walked quietly to the stage. The entire room fell silent. Nina turned, her eyes asking, "Did I say something wrong?" He shook his head, then knelt, and pulled a white envelope from his jacket pocket. Inside was the official court ruling. Full guardianship, permanent. Guardian's name, Elliot James Carrington. Protected child, Nina Dolores Rosales Carrington. He didn't read it out loud. He simply handed it to her. Nina looked at it, then didn't smile, didn't cheer, didn't do anything dramatic like in storybooks. She just held his hand, tight, certain. "Dad," she said, "I want to go home." That night, in the small apartment now repainted a warm cream, with a new fridge, a round dining table, and a framed drawing titled "My Home" hanging on the wall, they didn't celebrate with cake or balloons. They celebrated with a promise. Gloria, frail but alert, sat near the window, her hand trembling slightly as she held a cup of milk. Elliot sat between the two of them, his arm wrapped around Nina's shoulders. No one spoke of the future. No one mentioned what had been lost. Only presence, unconditional, unpretending. That night, as Nina slept peacefully in her own room, with a moon-shaped nightlight newly installed just the day before, Elliot stepped onto the balcony. He opened his phone. Not to check the news, but to write a quiet note. "No blood ties us together. Only choice does. And when you chose to call me Dad, I became the one who stays, never turning away." He saved the note, set the phone down, and at last, for the first time in his life, he felt he had arrived at the place truly called home. Thank you for staying with us until the very end, where one open door led not just into a room, but into something far deeper. A true home. We hope the journey of Elliot and Nina touched something in you. A gentle reminder that real love doesn't need to shout. It only needs to show up, consistently, quietly, every single day. If you believe that small acts can change an entire life, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story that might move you just as deeply. We'll see you again in the next journey, where the simplest things often turn out to be the most precious.